Hi everyone, welcome back to Life for Your Soul. In this episode, we're going to start our new topic series on the Sabbath. And it's going to be great because we're going to get into the nitty gritty of it and what it's all about and how you can apply it to your life. And Virginia has some amazing insights that you don't want to miss. So stay tuned.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Excited for a new topic arc today.
Yep, so we are going into a new topic, like Virginia just said, and we're excited because this is one that Virginia is piloting. Virginia, the Lord spoke to her and was like,
Yes.
We need to talk about this. And so she's taking the reins this topic arc, which is going to be totally fun.
I'm excited about it because we're talking about the Sabbath, and it's something that I've been experimenting personally in my own family for the past few years. And the past, like in 2023, we've been very intentional about it, and it's just highlighted so many things in my life that I feel like people really need to hear. And there's also a lot of, I feel like misconception might not be the right word, but there's just so much that people think that we don't need to take a day off, or the Sabbath is just like a Jewish thing, or, you know, we just don't need to be so concerned about the Sabbath. And I have a lot to share about it. So I'm excited because everybody needs to have some time off, and more than just, you know, a day to lay on the couch. So.
Yeah, and I think this topic also has a lot of baggage and misunderstanding around it. And then like, and a lot of, different views of like how to observe it or what it would look like to observe it, whether Christians need to observe it, you know, all of those things. So we'll navigate all that together.
Yeah. All right. So before we get into all of that fun Sabbath chit chat, I wanted to say hey and hi and hello and welcome. If you're new to the show, if you haven't been here before, that is Rachael and I'm Virginia. I guess that, or I don't know which side of my head she's going to be on, but one of these people.
I'm here. I'm Rachael.
And we started this ministry together in 2021, and Life for Your Soul is the very first little baby that we made for the ministry. And so we've moved recently all of our episodes over onto YouTube. So welcome. We're glad that you're here, and you'll be, if you like what you hear, we'd love if you would subscribe or give us a little thumbs up. Helps the algorithm. And this is where you're going to find us on this channel, along with a bunch of other stuff that our ministry produces. So we're happy that you're here. Welcome.
You can check out our website at not Life for Your Soul. You can check out our website at thesevenfold.com for any more updates and stuff, and get a cool look at Virginia's website designing skills.
That's true. I'm also a web designer, so
Yep.
I can help you out if you need some things.
And also we have a social media presence both on Facebook and Instagram.
Yes. So definitely check us out in those places. We are getting better slowly at posting more things and communing with all of you online, which we're very excited to do and build some community there. Yeah. So the Sabbath. There's so many things that we could talk about with Sabbath. We're going to try to just teach you guys some stuff and have you come on a little journey with us. We're going to be a little bit more flexible this topic arc and just like, let's see where the conversation goes. So, a couple of things that I thought would be really, really cool. I don't want to give like a full-blown history lesson on the Sabbath, but I thought if we could do a little truncated version, that would be really good, because Rachael and I, even amongst ourselves, had a little bit of debate about the Sabbath and how we wanted to approach the episode, because I'm very much, you need to take an actual day of rest every single week, put it in your calendar, do it. And Rachael, would you like to share a little bit about your philosophy?
I mean, I totally agree with like physical rest, because if you look at the point of God saying the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, like Jesus said, meaning that we as humans need it, and that there's different applications for need. Like on one end, our physical bodies need a break. Our lives need a break. Our mental and emotional selves need a break. And so that's tied to like the specific following that spiritual discipline. And Virginia's really going to get into why it's a spiritual discipline. But also there's a component to it that is spiritual, because in we'll get into it too, but in Hebrews it's talking about that we enter in the Sabbath rest, that it's a spiritual reality that that Christ has brought us into. And so it's more than just a simple take a day off.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to it.
Yeah. So a little backstory into the Sabbath is, yes, it's a physical day off, but it's also a spiritual place of rest as well. And so a little bit of the background behind how that looks is, let's just jump backwards in time. God creates the earth, right? So he makes the earth over the course of 6 days. And then every time he talks about it, he says there was night and there was morning. Yes. And then, that was the end of the first day. And so every single day, day 1 through 6, this is kind of the pattern that it shows. It was night and it was morning, and then it was the end of this day, and then everything that God did. And so we learn through that's kind of the cycle that God sees things as, is from sunset to sunset is the days. And also when he goes into the 7th day, it says that there's like the beginning of the 7th day and God rested from all of his work. But then there's no ending of the 7th day in the beginning of Genesis chapter 2. So when you look at it from that, it kind of brings us into this idea of like, okay, so God has entered this rest and there's no end. It's just we've now entered into this rest of God, resting from his work. But then, of course, Adam and Eve are there. Things go a little off plan. They eat from
off plan.
a lot off plan. And so that's I feel like a very significant part as to why when God curses man in the garden, he curses them specifically with labor and toil and working and for the land and all these things, because they're no longer in this place of rest that's filled with God's presence, right? Like now they have been cursed with this thing. So God obviously wants to restore us back to that 7th day rest, if you will. And he does that with his people of Israel. He starts there. When they're in the wilderness, when the people of Israel are in the wilderness, God invites them into a place of rest. And what's interesting is if you look at Exodus 16 and Exodus 20, Exodus 20 is when we're actually given the 10 commandments. But God actually talks about the Sabbath before he gets to the 10 commandments. He talks about it in Exodus 16, because what he does for the people of Israel is he is giving them their manna. He's giving them this supernatural food that he just appears, right? God just gives it to them. And he says to specifically on Friday, on Shabbat, which means like a cessation of work, that you're going to collect all the food that you need for today and tomorrow. And only enough for what you need for the next day. And that's the day that you're not going to work, you're going to rest. And that's a physical rest he wanted them to take. But we can also see that it's poetic, and it's this thing of like, I'm going to provide for you what you need, but you also need to have this day of rest, at the end of this week. And so I'm going to let Rachel chat a little bit if she wants to, but, the bigger picture of this too is if you look at it, it's very interesting because you break once every 7 days for the Sabbath. And that starts with Shabbat on Friday night. And then every 7 years, or there's 7 festivals that the Jewish people participate in. One is surrounding Sabbath rest, is one of those 7. And then every 7 years in Jewish culture, at least back in the Old Testament times, every 7th year, things were restored. Slaves were released from confinement, or from, duty. There's all these different things that were that gave us rest and gave us a restoration at the 7th year. And then every 70 years was the year of Jubilee, where lands were restored back to the original families and owners of the land, like debts were forgiven and returned. And so it kind of like shows us this cycle that the Lord has, that we're supposed to be continually coming into this place of rest and really honoring him in what we're doing. So I didn't know if you wanted to just jump in there, Rachel, and say anything or no.
Well, actually, like the Sabbath was the part of the 10 commandments is to keep the Sabbath day.
Yeah, for sure.
It did make Israel unique because there wasn't any other society that mandated rest for everyone from top to bottom, like not just the leadership, but for the little guys. Yeah. And also it incorporated wisdom of nature, because God also told them to make sure that the land rested. So like there were certain periods of time where you had to let the land lie fallow. I think that was on the 7th year, and they may not have understood why, but like we know now that crop rotation and that like giving the land a break actually refertilizes the soil, it remineralizes the soil.
Yeah.
So that the ground doesn't get the quality doesn't deteriorate. But they had no way of knowing that, and with the Israelites, like if you're outside looking in, you know, like, okay, they mandate this rest, they don't do this, but yet they're blessed. But yet there was an abundance there. They were, if they were following all of God's precepts, including the Sabbath, everything went really well for them. And so from societies looking in from the outside would be like, that's unique. That's not like us, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's that part of it where I think it's funny is I was talking to Rachel when we were planning out the episode, works kind of like an evangelism tool because the Jewish people are historically wealthy. They know they're good business owners. They're very, shrewd. They end up being wealthy people. And it's not a coincidence that they are following these commandments of the Lord and they're being blessed. Now, that's a different conversation as to, obviously the Jewish, customs have skewed over the course of time and, maybe they're a bit more religious than God intended. But there is that honoring of what the Lord had said, and then they're being blessed. And I think it's interesting as well, if you look at, there's people who, you just think about it right now. Like, let's say you don't take a Sabbath. Okay. Let's say you're not taking a day off intentionally. Like you don't have a very intentional day off. And I'm going to get into that more in just a couple minutes. Look at your 5-day work week and then the weekend that you have. Like, how much rest are you really getting? How good do you feel Monday morning when you're going into work? What does that feel like for you? And maybe you're gonna come like to realize like, the weekends are great, but also I never feel like there's enough time. Like that's just the whole thing, right? Everyone's like, oh, if there was one more day to the weekend, there could just be one more day to the weekend, then I would really, be rested. And a lot of that is because we're trying to fill our weekends with way too much stuff and we're not resting intentionally. I would love if you would try taking a day off, intentionally giving it to the Lord to honor him, and then working for 6 days. Because I feel like the issue is that we have 5 days of work and 2 days off on the weekend, and then we don't have enough time to get everything done. But if we actually worked for 6 days and only took 1 day off instead of 2, it's like, I feel like your mind is going to be blown. Try it for a while. And hopefully by the end of this episode, as we unpack everything, you'll want to. Because a big thing that I want to talk about here as well is some people talk about the 10 Commandments and the difference of Old Testament and New Testament and how, Jesus said that if you take all the 10 Commandments, really they all sum up into, honor the Lord your God with all your mind, strength, heart, emotions, all the things. And then love your neighbor as yourself, right? We're supposed to basically love God and then love people. But if you look at the 10 Commandments, like I was saying in Exodus 20, as they're written out, the first 5 commandments are all about honoring God and honor. You're supposed to honor the God. You're supposed to have no other gods before him, right? You're supposed to not have any idols. That's number 2, is not having any idols. You're supposed to not take the Lord's name in vain.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to take a Sabbath and then honor your mother and your father. Those are the first 5 of the 10 Commandments. So those first 5, directly in half, all sum up to be honor the Lord with all your heart, strength. What is it exactly? Heart, mind, and strength?
It's in more than one place, but honor the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength.
Okay. So if that, and the Sabbath is number 4, right? It's above honor your parents. Which I find very interesting. I love that the God's like, I am the only God in your life. You will have no other idols before me. Don't take my name in vain and take a day off. Right. And the taking the day off, that's kind of why I wanted to call this topic our Just Take the Day, because so many of us get caught up in our head, and it's like, would you stop over, just take the day, don't overthink it. But it's more than just taking a day off. We're supposed to take the Sabbath. We're supposed to make it holy. It's supposed to be a day that's set apart for God and made holy. Now, let's get into this a little bit. What does that look like for you? What does that look like for the average person? Taking a day off is not it's not any one thing in particular. I'm going to get into a lot of the practical application of what we can really do taking a day off, probably in a different episode, because I have a lot of things that I wanted to share about practically what does that look like for you. But the most important thing, first and foremost, is that this is a day that we have set apart to honor the Lord. This is a day that we're supposed to be setting aside for Him. So ultimately, it's going to look different for me than it does for Rachel. And it's going to look different for us than it's going to look for you. And I've had to, like, my husband and I have sat down and had conversations together about what it looks like for us. And, Rachel and I want to talk about this. And so I'm going to kind of jump into it now because I feel like it would be a good segue. There's a lot of rest that it needs to be dedicated to the Lord. You need to ask Him what His direction is for your Sabbath and what that should look like, what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And the biggest hurdle that I think that people have with this is obedience and boundaries. Because if you are going to be intentional about taking a day off, then you are going to run into some barriers. You're going to run into some blockades. People are going to, no surprise, people are going to start calling you up and asking you to do things. Things are going to run into your schedule. Oh, some emergency comes up and you have to do this thing, but then there's an emergency every week. And it's going to run into boundaries that you're going to have to then be in a position where you're deciding what's more important to me, honoring God and what God has told me to do, or keeping my Sabbath. Or doing the thing that is, confronting my schedule and confronting my calendar.
So if I were to put my 2 cents in, I totally agree with what Virginia is saying. But I also wanted to reemphasize the point where it says keep the Sabbath and keep it holy. And I think we just need to revisit what holy means, because holy means, she said it says set apart. But set apart means dedicated. So anything that was made holy for the temple or for anything that God was using for God's use. If something was made holy and set aside, it was to be used for God's use, and it was not going to be used for anything else. And it couldn't be taken back, right? Like if I gave something, like the furniture and the items in the temple, like the menorah and all of that, they would dedicate it, they would make it, but then it wouldn't just be thrown into the temple. It would have to be then dedicated, anointed, and set apart and declared holy before it could be taken in. And there's a component to this that the tithe is holy. When you set apart the tithe, it's God's and it belongs to Him. The Sabbath becomes holy and set apart. So it's one of those things where, I think we can emphasize the fact that it's we could say, hey, just try the Sabbath, because we truly trust that when God says do it and you obey Him, you're going to be blessed. It's going to work out well for you. And honestly, it's a low risk thing for a lot of people, especially in the US. They can afford to take some time off or afford to honor God with their Sabbath and actually do it. But like Virginia said, you kind of have to fiddle with your priorities and fiddle with your boundaries and be okay, what am I actually prioritizing? And what boundaries do I need to set? Because I think too, it kind of keeps you from procrastinating, because if you're okay, I have to have this boundary. The priority is I'm going to take the day. Well, that means that there's certain things you can't do in that day. So that helps you set your intention the rest of the week. So, and when you set the intention the rest of the week, you get more done. And so those are some of the things that Virginia's talking about, and we'll get into the how-to later. But we can basically say, you will be blessed if you do this.
Yeah.
But there is a component of okay, so maybe you're not doing it all the time, or maybe you've really never thought about it, or, you're like, my day off is my day off. I'm not working, so therefore it's a Sabbath. But you're also filling that day off with all sorts of things. Well, there's going to be some negative repercussions of not honoring the Sabbath. And Virginia can talk more about that. But like, there's going to be negative associations of like, you're going to be more stressed out. You're going to be overwhelmed. You're going to not give your body the break it needs to recoup and recover. You're not giving your mind the time it needs to recoup and recover. We can get overstimulated with doing too many things for too many people, with too many people. Our introverts out there know, like, if you don't have some alone time,
Yeah.
So there's a whole point. Like, when God said he made it for man, we have to trust and believe God that that's going to bless us, that there's a reason. And there could be even deeper levels of spiritual reasons and soul reasons and body reasons that we don't even fully understand medically, but like would benefit us. But we just, like, this is Virginia's famous tagline, just do it. Like, just obey God. Like, don't ask questions. Like, you don't have to ask questions. You don't have to know why to obey him. Yeah. But like, we can really trust that when we start stepping into stuff like this, and when God says, hey, do this, like, we can trust that it's going to go well for us.
Yeah. And I love that when you mentioned that about, like, overworking ourselves and getting stressed out, because it's so interesting. While I was doing research, because I know what I've had in my life and what's happened to me and my family, but I wanted to, prepare a bit to share with all of you guys. I've heard the story, which is actually quite terrible, but there was a man who was working in a factory. He wasn't like a factory worker. He was management, but he had a lot of work to do, to keep everything running. And he ended up working 110 hours a week, which is the equivalent of basically 7 days straight of working 16 hours a day. And I think that all of us can agree that, like, that's too much. But there are people in certain places, like high corporate lawyers, when you're just getting out of law school and all kinds of things, where people do end up working 80 to 100-hour weeks. It's crazy. But the problem with it is this man was found dead at his desk, and he had died doing his work of a massive heart attack. But the most tragic part of the story is that he was only 34 years old. And this has been happening. This happened, and it's probably still happening so much in especially Asian cultures, that Japan and China and Korea actually had to invent a word in their vocabulary to describe when you're working like this. And all the descriptions are basically the same. The qualifiers are working insane hours, under intense pressure, with little to no rest. And when I was writing this out, I was like, this sounds like a newborn motherhood situation. And it is hard. Like, it's such a hard place, right? If you've ever had a baby, you're tired. Your brain doesn't function right. It's hard to form sentences. Like, you're not sleeping a lot. It's a difficult time. And we're not supposed, and then, that's a season of our life, but it's not supposed to last very long. And also, that's why mothers of small children are not really expected to do much else outside of just taking care of them, because that's all that we can physically do. So just a tangent, 'cause moms are awesome. But and Rachel had mentioned, like, it is a spiritual discipline. So I wanted to highlight this book. This is by John Mark Comer. It's The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. It was put on to me by a friend, and it like just changed the way that she functioned. And I read it, and it has also contributed so much to the intentionality that I take of my Sabbath and really setting it apart. This book, what I like about it is, if you're not really a book person, or maybe you get distracted or fall asleep when you're reading books, this book is written like a blog post. It's not formatted like a typical book. So that makes it really easy to read. There's a lot of like dark, bold pages and text. So it's very, it keeps your attention. And the amount of quotes from smart people in this book about the Sabbath, just rest and hurry and all those kinds of things, is mind-blowing. It's so good. So I wanted to read you a little part of it. And so this is talking about how the Sabbath actually is a spiritual discipline that we need, just like reading your Bible, just like prayer. The Sabbath is spiritual discipline. And so he's talking about how disciplines in general are a way to access power. And he says, a spiritual discipline is similar but different. It's similar in that any activity I can do by direct effort will eventually enable me to do that which I currently cannot do by direct effort. It's a way to access power, but it's different in that not only are you exercising your own capacity to do the right thing, i.e., using your willpower to actually take the Sabbath, but you're also opening yourself up to a power that's far beyond that of yourself, which is the Holy Spirit. And you're creating time and space to access God Himself at the deepest level of our being. And Dallas Willard has a quote in this book that says, "The disciplines are activities of mind and body purposely undertaken to bring our personality and our total being into effective cooperation with divine order. They enable us more and more to live in a power that is, strictly speaking, beyond us, derived from the spiritual realm itself." And the part that I love this so much, just emphasizing that it is a spiritual discipline, but it really highlights that while we can do something physically by taking a day of rest and giving it to God and doing what He tells us to do and not doing the things that He didn't say for us to do, we get to physically rest our bodies, and then we enter into that supernatural spiritual rest that Holy Spirit and God provide to us by honoring Him in that taking it and setting it apart. So I want to let Rachael chit chat a little bit as well. But I wanted to say that, this whole conversation has so much to do with how us partnering in the physical of God brings us into a spiritual place with God. And we can do so much by honoring Him in the Sabbath. Like in my family, we rest. I try my best. I have a setting on the new iPhones. I don't know if Androids do this, but the new iPhones, like if you have do not disturb or focus, you can actually create your own focus mode. And mine is called Sabbath mode. And when Sabbath mode turns on at Friday at 5 p.m., it turns off on Saturday at 5 p.m. And every Friday at 5, all of a sudden my background picture changes to a graphic I made that says, "Ignore me, go away," to help me remember, like, put my phone down, don't look at my phone, stay off social media. I want to be more intentional about connecting with my family and spending time with my kids and spending time with my husband. And I want to be able to rest and do things together. And when I take that day of rest, I walk into the rest of the week with so much more ability to do things and to focus and produce work. And it really is supernatural. I don't have another way of describing it, because I shouldn't be able to do the amount of things that I do in a week. And while some people look at companies like Chick-fil-A, like, how can you be so profitable when you take an entire day on the weekend, no less, off, and you're not making food for people? How can you be so profitable? I might not be contributing in the wealth perspective of it, but the things that I can do working multiple companies in ministry and raising 6 children and still have a healthy marriage and joy for my family, to me, like, that's crazy wealth. Like, and I'm not losing my mind.
Going back to the last topic, when we were talking about the soul and the spirit and like the difference between the two, if we kind of think of ourselves as a sandwich with the soul in the middle and spirit on one side and body on the other side, there are different ways of how God can form your soul into the image of Christ. And it kind of comes from both sides. So like if you yield to God in the normal physical everyday applications, like, okay, I'm going to exercise, or I'm going to get up at a certain time, or I'm going to physically get up and move during worship. Like, I'm going to raise my hands, I'm going to clap, I'm going to stomp my feet, whatever. When you start participating in the physical, you're trusting and saying that, God, I trust that the spiritual reality is available to me in the physical, and I will partner with it. So like, you're coming from this side, like the Sabbath is the physical. It's like, okay, I'm taking a physical rest. I'm doing something in my calendar. I'm doing something in my daily life. I'm doing something that, like, it starts off as just I'm just going to do this because it's the right thing to do. I'm just going to do it because I should do it. even if you don't feel like it, right? You're like, I'm trusting God, and so that's kind of from the outside in. And that kind of discipline, a lot of people can go pretty far with that discipline. It's like making yourself exercise, making yourself eat right, making yourself get up at a certain time, make yourself go to bed at a certain time. Like, these are all things like doing stuff you don't want to do, even though you don't feel like it. That helps create a healthier soul. But it also allows, when the soul is complying to God's will and desires, well, that also opens up for the Spirit to flow more. So that's kind of what he's talking about. He's like, you start with what you can do, and you start with the literal things that you can do. And when you do those things, then the door opens up for the spiritual flow of God and the power of God to come in and to take over and to really fill that space. But you kind of have to give God the space to fill. And I think that's kind of what the Sabbath really is. It's taking a break from worldly passions, worldly desires, from, all the busy things that we could do, like mind busyness, like Virginia was saying about social media, like not looking at social media, taking a break, giving time and space to God so that he can fill you with his rest. And, so it's like an all-encompassing thing, but you have to start somewhere. Like, you can't wait for God to suddenly zap you with the spiritual desire to do the Sabbath. I mean, he might, but that would be great, right? He zaps you like, oh, I must do the Sabbath. I've realized I violated the 10 commandments and I'm ready to go. Okay, that's great. Wonderful. But also, we're suggesting, by doing this topic arc, that we're suggesting that you trust us and you trust the word of God and you start moving in that direction. And whatever space and time you give God, let's say you can't do all day. Okay, well, do a half a day or do a few hours. Like, just start somewhere in your daily walk or your weekly walk or with your family that you're like, okay, I'm going to start small. I have 3 hours this weekend. I'm going to give God 3 hours, right? You can grow that. But the goal here and what we are proposing is that you really need to take at least a full work day-ish, or, full, 5 to 5, 24-hour period of time to give God the space that he needs to work.
Yeah. I mean, I would really encourage you to try doing sunset to sunset. Or if you don't want like the actual physical sunset, if you want to do like, I do 5 to 5 because then it's pretty aggregate over the whole year. But I would encourage you to take 24 hours, and I would encourage you to try it and see how it feels. Because I'll tell you what, for me, what I have found, it makes such a difference when you start at night, like the night before, and you start your day off then. Now, granted, if that's how God intended the days to go, is, from sunset to sunset, then, and there's a lot of other religions that they do things sunset to sunset as well. So, I feel like if that's how it was supposed to be, then let me try it. And so I tried it, and, it makes such a difference. When I wake up on Saturday morning, when Saturday was our day off, and it was just like Saturday was the day off, all of Saturday, I was like, I don't know, like I woke up in the morning and it didn't feel right. It didn't feel very restful. I was like, okay, it's the morning of the day off and I'm excited, but I don't know. I don't have words to say it. But what I can tell you in comparison is that when we start our day off on Friday night, it like kickstarts the time off. We get to like have movie night together as a family. We sit down and have dinner together. We're much more intentional. If Jacob and I stay up late doing something together, it just seems more fun because we don't have anything to do tomorrow. We know we get to rest. And then when we wake up on Saturday morning, there's just this expectation of like, oh yes, like I'm not doing anything. And it feels good and it feels so much different. And I can't really explain it. And I'm so sorry because it's a terrible podcasting thing of like, just believe me, just trust me. I should be able to articulate it, but I think it is supernatural. And so it is hard to articulate things that are supernatural. But something to encourage you is that when Jesus started his ministry, not some, not the starting a mystery in the sense that, when he was 33 and he was baptized by John and, the dove descended, not that part of his ministry. But the first thing that when he was younger and he was in the synagogue and he was reading as a young boy, he read from the book of Isaiah, right? And that was on the Sabbath that he was doing that. And so some people mark the start of his ministry there on the Sabbath. His body was buried at the end of the week. And when he rose again, it was the first day of the new week. It was the 8th day that Jesus rose again. And so there is some speculation with some people that that's why Christians celebrate their day off on Sunday as opposed to Saturday. There's also other speculation as to why, but this one in particular I find interesting because it's again the entering into that supernatural rest, entering into that spiritual rest with our risen Savior, just like God entered in that spiritual rest on the 7th day of creation. And there was one other thing that I was going to say. So because we have this like resurrection hope, we have this eternal glorious rest that we can follow Jesus into. He is also our way to enter that rest, right? So it is personal conscience. It's a personal relationship with Jesus that brings us into that Sabbath. Like Rachel said, you might not get the lightning bolt of, hey, go take a Sabbath. For me, I knew the importance of a day off, but I either read something or I saw something and it just hit me in a way that it hadn't hit me before. And it sparked something in my spirit in a way that I hadn't before. And for me, like Rachel was saying, like, that's all it takes for me. I don't really need a lot of convincing when it comes to Holy Spirit. If I feel prompted, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And so I would encourage you to try that as well, because there is, something that Rachel said that I think is really important when we were planning this, is that rest and trust are very tightly linked together. And I know it's different and to some people, and we feel like we have a lot of stuff to do, but my kids have soccer on Saturday and I'm doing all these things. I would just say, find a way to just tell the Lord, I honor you. And I trust you. And I trust you that by entering into this rest, by being intentional of stepping back from the worldly things, and by setting some boundaries maybe with some people in my life, I'm trusting that you will fill it and you will fill me, and that I will be rested and I will be able to do all the things that you want me to do over the rest of the week. Because people talk a lot about, going to church on Sunday and then you feel all spiritual and good on Sunday. But then when you go back into your work week, you kind of like slack off and you're like, oh yeah, I'm just, you don't really do anything for God the rest of the week. And so if that's kind of like the stage of life that you're in right now, if you kind of like, why don't I feel so good, on Monday as I feel after I leave church? I would encourage you to be really intentional about taking a Sabbath, taking a day off, and setting those boundaries. Because for me, I think that that's actually the blossoming that makes the rest of your week more full, is by start taking the day off.
And trust and rest are tied together. But I was also this week, as somebody was talking about procrastination, and they said that procrastination is bad for your health because you stress because you just didn't get it done. And so you're stressing. So even though, up until the time you do the thing you're procrastinating, you just stressed out. And, like if you kind of need to have all your ducks in a row for you to really turn off, like, what does it take for you guys, like, this week, just like think through, what does it take for you to be able to be like, okay, I literally am going to, like, I don't have to worry about everything. It's a load off my mind. I literally am just being, like, I have nothing on my plate. I have nothing to do. Well, that goes back to the prioritizing and boundaries, because you have to, in order to trust God, well, then in some ways you kind of have to hustle ahead of time, because you're going to have to be like, okay, if I trust God that I absolutely have to rest and I actually have to give the break and I actually, what I need to, in order to feel rested and to take a break is to get all my stuff done. Well, Jewish tradition is you get all your stuff done. Like Friday is very busy. Like you get the hustle on and you get the food prepped and you do all the things before sundown and you have a deadline to get it done. And then you prep everything ahead of time because you're not supposed to cook on Saturday and all of those things. So like there's a certain point where like the Sabbath is for man, not man for the Sabbath, but you are going to have to shift gears. It's not just, you can start with taking a break. Just any kind of break is good if you're not used to doing it. But once you become intentional about it and you really start setting boundaries of time frame and like Virginia's done the work of setting a boundary from 5 to 5, then it's a process, right? It's a process. Like Virginia's path to this has changed and evolved over time, but it's a process of making your life conform to fulfilling the Sabbath. It's not a religious duty. Like that's the thing. If you look at this as a religious go-to, then it's not going to benefit you very much. And that's the point we're making. Because there's just there's so much misunderstanding around the Sabbath. And there's some people that that are Torah observant Christians, maybe they seemed a little extreme and you're like, well, I don't feel like I have to go all out to like only wear dresses and have a doily on my head and to the Sabbath. So maybe you shied away from that in the past because you're just like, it just seemed like there's a lot of baggage. But if you boil it down to the basic essence of doing this, it's saying God owns one of your days. And he's telling you that that day is the day that you need to rest. And when you comply to that and you work towards that goal, you will be blessed. And the next couple episodes, we kind of will break that down, like the nitty gritty of how to do that. But it is going to change your trajectory, and then your life has to change to fulfill that trajectory. And it's only a good thing. It's going to make you a more disciplined person. It's going to make you more focused and present in the areas like when you actually do have to get down to work because you actually took a load off. Like you literally rested. And I think that's why Virginia is so passionate about the subject over the years when I've talked to her. Is like, it's just like, there's a certain point in your life where everyone needs to veg out. I would not veg out on Netflix. That's just my opinion. But like, there has to be a point in time where if you schedule your veg out, then you're not stressed about doing it on Tuesday night or Wednesday night and go, oh, I'm not going to get my stuff done. Right. Yeah. And there's a grown upness about the Sabbath that like, it's like, okay, I have to take ownership of my life. And just like with your finances, like you take ownership of your finances by giving God the tithe and by giving some of the money to God because it belongs to him. You're taking ownership of your life and going, I'm dedicating time to rest and time to God. And that means I have to get control the reins of the rest of my life. Yeah. And when you do this, God's just going to bless it. And if it seems like an impossible task right now, trust me, it's not. It's one of those things that God will go above and beyond doing things for you to ensure that you can do this. Anytime God tells us to do something, and maybe we can kind of close up on this, but anytime God tells you to do something, he is doing it fully intending to provide the means, the grace, and the supply to do that thing.
Yeah.
He's not going to leave you stranded and say, oh, go do this thing. And you're like, it's impossible. And he's like, okay, but with me, it is possible.
Yeah, I love that. I have two things I want to say, and then, we can close up. One, I love that you said the grown-upness. There's an adulthood about it because there was a woman that I followed, and she runs multiple companies that are like successful companies, and she has 10 children, maybe 8. She has 8 to 10 kids, can't remember exactly. And she, it's a lot, and she's doing stuff from as soon as she wakes up until like 9 o'clock at night. She gives herself like 1 hour from 9 to 10 to unwind at the end of the day. But she's going from when she wakes up until 9 p.m. And that's how she gets all of her things done. And I remember thinking like, she does take a day off. But I remember thinking like, that sounds exhausting. And I was feeling really whiny about it. And I was like, Lord, I don't want to work constantly from when I wake up until 9 o'clock at night. Like, that's exhausting. Where's my me time? Where is my rest? Like, why can't, like, where's my time where I can just like unwind and relax? And there is the grown upness about trusting God that I'm going to work and do the things that I need to do every day. And no, I don't have the time to watch 3 hours of Netflix every night before I do whatever. Honestly, right now, nor would I want to. It's a waste. But Rachel's right. When you have that day set aside where you can do those things, if that is how your Sabbath goes, for some people, I encourage you to disconnect. But like, it feels different because you're delaying what you want right now, knowing that you can have it later. And there is a lot of grown-upness about it. And then also trusting that in that day of rest, you actually will be rested. I did want to read a bit of Hebrews 4 just to tie up this episode, because it ties so perfectly to the beginning of the episode when we were talking about God. And I'm going to have Rachel put, since Rachel's our editor, she's so amazing, a couple of verses at the bottom of the screen here. I'm not going to read them right now, but I would encourage you to go and look them up. John 5:16-17 is Jesus they're talking about the Sabbath, and he says that God's always working, so I will too. And then Isaiah, which is like very interesting, right? Isaiah 58:13 is talking about how in the Sabbath we're not to pursue our own interests. And then in Mark 2:23-28, Jesus is talking about how the Sabbath is for us, right? And I'm pretty sure that's the verse that's about how Sabbath is for man not for the Sabbath. As in, it's built for us. We don't need to be religiously, to observe it in that way. And if you look at the paradox and the juxtaposition of, the Sabbath is made for us and we're not supposed to do things, but also Jesus is saying that God's always working, so I will too. And also don't pursue any of your own interests. I think you can see from our conversation today how all of those things are true at the same time. And I think that they're summed up so great then when we jump into Hebrews 4 and Paul is talking about this promised rest for God's people. So I want to just read a few verses from Hebrews 4. This is out of the NLT. God's promise of entering his rest still stands, so we ought to tremble with fear that some of you might fail to experience it. For this good news that God has prepared, this rest, has been announced just to us as it was to them. But it did them no good because they didn't share the faith of those who listened to God. For only we who believe can enter his rest. As for the others, God said, "In my anger I took an oath that they will never enter my place of rest, even though this rest has been ready since he made the world." We know it's ready because of the place in the scriptures where it mentions the seventh day. On the seventh day, God rested from all his work. But in the other passage, God said that they will never enter my place of rest. So God's rest is there for the people to enter, but those who first heard this good news and failed to enter because they disobeyed God. So God set another time for entering his rest, and that time is today. God announced that through David, much later, these words were already quoted. Today, when you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts. Now, if Joshua had succeeded in giving them this rest, God would not have spoken about any other day of rest still to come. So there's a special rest still waiting for the people of God. For all of those who have entered into God's rest have rested from their labors, just as God did after creating the world. So let us do our best to enter that rest. But if we disobey God, as the people of Israel did, we will fall. For the word of God is alive and powerful. It's sharper than the sharpest two-edged sword, cutting between soul and spirit, between joint and marrow. It exposes our innermost thoughts and desires. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God. Everything is naked and exposed before his eyes, and he is the one to whom we are accountable. And I really love this because Rachel loves this verse so much, verse 12, of how the word of God is alive and it cuts between. We talk about it all the time on the podcast. We reference this verse, and I just love how the entire preceding 11 verses before it is talking about Sabbath and God's rest, and how all of it ends with, it's to God that we're accountable for these things.
Yeah, so there's a couple components to this. Like Virginia was talking about the sevens at the beginning, like God did everything in sevens. Well, God does things in layers. So there is the physical rest of the Sabbath. There is a yearly rest of a vacation, or in the case of Israel, it was the 7 periods of the feast, like the feast as they were observed. There was breaks in time. But But when he's saying that we enter into the Sabbath rest, what we're saying is that we now have available to us a rest in our spirit and our soul that is all day, every day. And then we take a physical day for our body and our mind. That's the material part of us that's stuck on this planet. But then eventually we will all enter into the permanent rest, which is eternity. So like that's what we all have looking forward to. And when you think about like how restful, like the most restful, amazing day you've ever had, like if you take that and go, okay, times that by 1,000 and extend it into eternity, like that's what it's going to be like for us when we're with God in the end, and when everything closes up in time and space. So we're pointing to a greater reality, and so in future episodes, like we'll talk about more about what it means to be spiritually restful. And and honestly, this whole point of this podcast over the, past 2 years has been to help you reach that place of rest in your soul.
Right.
So these are not separate things. They are compatible. They all go together and they all apply.
Yeah.
So we're just exploring those different avenues.
Yeah, I love it. I love it, and I can't wait. So thanks for being here. If you liked the episode, if you appreciate this topic, I would love it if you would give us a thumbs up. If you are listening to us over on the podcast, please, please, please do me a favor, screenshot your screen right now and post it over on social media. We are at The Sevenfold Ministries on Instagram and Facebook. We would love to connect with you and have you share this awesome topic with some friends, especially those who are maybe overworked and tired. Share with a mom.
Yeah, well, we love you guys. We bless you. And we're signing off till next time.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.